What do you often think about? What do you dwell on? What do you feed your mind with? Wrong thinking leads to wrong feelings, which often leads to wrong actions and words and attitudes, which can be devastating to our relationships with our spouse and other family members, and even our relationship with the Lord. What we focus on, what we think about, shapes who we are. And there are all kinds of voices that are clamoring for our attention today. And we need to be very careful who we listen to and whose voices we reject. Of course, the enemy is constantly trying to derail us with his lies. The media industry, and especially social media, are powerful influencers of the way we think. And while we need to be aware of what's going on in the world in which we live, our minds can become saturated with the doom and gloom we hear on our 24/7 news channels. Paul wrote the book of Philippians from a Roman prison. Added to that, there was the uncertainty that at any moment a Roman soldier could take his life. And so from a human perspective, Paul had ample reason to be discouraged and to be anxious. But there's not a trace of discouragement or anxiety in the whole epistle. Instead, it's filled with joy and encouragement to the Philippian believers and also to us. And in chapter 4, Paul writes, "Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things." Our troubles and circumstances can sometimes be overwhelming. News broadcasts, especially if we're listening to them last thing at night, can make us anxious and fearful. Social media and the media industry in general is constantly feeding us a stream of worldly, anti-Christian, anti-biblical advice. And that's why Paul says we must bring into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. This is beautifully illustrated for us in the Old Testament in the life of David. One of the most discouraging times in David's life came just a few days before he was established as king over Israel. 1 Samuel chapter 30 says, "And David was greatly distressed, for the people spake of stoning him. But David encouraged himself in the Lord his God." Now there's at least two ways to encourage our hearts in the Lord, just like David did in the Old Testament. First, spend more time reading God's Word, especially the book of Psalms. Because many of the Psalms were written by David during times of discouragement and uncertainty. They help us put our own circumstances and problems into perspective, and they reveal a God who is totally in control. During my first year as a pastor, a member of our congregation was terminally ill in hospital, and on one particular occasion when I went to visit him, he was troubled and discouraged, having a panic attack, and nothing the hospital staff could do could calm him down. And as a young pastor, not knowing what else to do, I started reading to him from the Psalms. And even the hospital staff was amazed at how the reading of God's Word had such a powerful calming effect upon this man's spirit. Secondly, meditate on God's truth as you go to sleep. From the very beginning, the Jewish day began at sundown, in the evening, not midnight. And this would be especially noticeable if you were to visit Israel even today during their regular weekly Sabbath. All of the Jewish places of business would shut down on Friday evening before sunset as the families made preparation to welcome and celebrate the new Sabbath. And this has implications for us even today, particularly with regard to our thought life. When someone wakes up grouchy or irritable, we use the expression that he got out of bed on the wrong side. But it would be more accurate to say that he got into bed on the wrong side, because the last thing you think about at night before you go to sleep is usually the first thing that you think about the next morning when you awake. And if we allow our minds to focus on our circumstances or world events, perhaps even worrying about things that haven't yet happened, we give Satan an opportunity to cause us to be overwhelmed and discouraged. And it's at night that we are often faced with the most intense discouragement. David said in Psalm 63, "My mouth shall praise thee with joyful lips, when I remember thee upon my bed and meditate on thee in the night watches." We're not just talking about having a positive mental attitude. We're talking about filling and saturating your mind full of the truth of God's Word and meditating upon His character, His promises, and who He is. And the truth is, God is in control. No matter what's happening in our individual lives or even in current world events. The truth is that God is for us and not against us. He's even working through those discouraging circumstances to produce in us the character of Christ. The truth is that greater is He that is in us than he that is in the world. The only power that the enemy has over us is the power of the lie. Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." The Bible is no ordinary book. It is living and it is powerful, and focusing upon the truth of God's Word can bring peace and joy during our times of greatest discouragement.